During the years of 1894 and 1895, the Sino-Japanese War occurred, which was a war between the Empire of Japan and China. In the years leading up to the war, the Japanese Navy had significantly built itself up from foreign shipyards, and one of the most modern classes at their disposal was the Matsushima class. The three Matsushimas were built in France, and they were designed to French philosophies, which France was working on this concept of building an armored cruiser that was fast and heavily armed in order to combat battleships, but in the event a battleship had the upper hand, they could quickly disengage. During the Sino-Japanese War, the Japanese found that this concept worked very poor, as practically anything could punch holes in these ships, and they were almost never safe. Their immense firepower was also too heavy for the hull, and so each time they fired, some structural damage was done. As a result, Japan decided that they needed modern battleships, and they turned to Great Britain for this, since Britain, geographically, was similar to Japan, and Britain also had the most modern navy. This would result in the keels of battleships Fuji and Yashima being laid down in mid to late 1894. Following the end of the Sino-Japanese War, Japan would take control of the Liaotung Peninsula, and they would also earn significant capital gain from the Chinese government. Japan would enjoy these claims until the Triple Intervention, when Britain, France, and Russia told Japan they could not keep the Liaotung Peninsula, but they could keep the capital gains. Japan, which was in no position to go to war with any of those three nations, acquiesced to the request. While the war made it apparent that Japan was a very strong Eastern power, it was still not strong enough to combat any Western power, and Japan decided that needed to change. Enter Rear Admiral Ganohayo Yamamoto, whom I will state now was of no relation to Izoroku Yamamoto. The Minister of the Navy, Saigo, tasked Yamamoto with studying Japan's social attitudes, financial situation, and long-term goals in order to create a navy that would best suit the nation. Following the Sino-Japanese War, even after the Triple Intervention, Japan was still very patriotic. It was a relatively wealthy nation due to gains from the war, and it still intended to expand its empire's borders. All of this meant a significant fleet was going to be needed, and the 6-6 Fleet was created. As the name of the plan implies, Japan was going to build 6 battleships and 6 armored cruisers, along with a large variety of supporting vessels. When going through the construction numbers of the 6-6 Fleet, it only officially calls for 4 battleships to be built, as Japan already ordered 2 battleships, the aforementioned Fuji and Yashima. Those 2 were to be counted towards the 6, and since they were already started, they didn't need to be put in the plan. Skip forward to July 1897, and the keel to what would become IJN Asahi was laid down at the John Brown shipyard. Asahi was effectively an improved version of the Shikishima, and the Shikishima was an improved version of the Majestic. Just as construction work was beginning on Asahi, the Royal Navy was designing a new class of battleships for themselves, which would eventually become the Formidable class battleships, for which there were 2 subclasses and 8 ships constructed altogether. Formidable was an advance in battleship design and construction, as it would use new weaponry, new armor, a new armor scheme, and a new hull form, which allowed it to be a heavier ship, but retain the same speed as its predecessors, if not being faster. As Formidable's keel was being laid down in 1898, Japan was preparing to place an order for the 6th and final battleship of their 6-6 Fleet, and the 4th and final battleship of the 1896 program. The winner for the contract was Barrow-in-Furness, which would construct the ship for a cost of £880,000, or 8.8 million yen. The Mikasa's design was effectively copied from Formidable, with a few minor improvements, such as different ventilation, and 2 additional 6-inch guns. While Mikasa would only be marginally superior to Formidable, it was greatly superior to all of the preceding Japanese battleships. It would end up having an overall length of 432 feet, a beam of 76 feet, and a draft of 27 feet. The ship would also have a displacement of 15,140 tons. The ship was contracted to make a top speed of 18 knots at 15,000 shaft horsepower. The selected propulsion system would consist of 2 sets of 3-cylinder triple expansion reciprocating engines, with the cylinder diameters being 31 inches, 50 inches, and 82 inches respectively. The engines would have a maximum stroke of 48 inches, and they were capable of rotating the propellers 120 times per minute. In order to power the engines, 25 Belleville boilers operating at 300 psi were installed. What makes the boilers unique was the method of installation, as the first funnel would service the first set of 5 and the second set of 10 boilers, while the second funnel would service the last 10 boilers. In common practice, these numbers would be reversed, and the second funnel would have normally serviced more boilers. All of this machinery would ultimately connect to 2 propellers with a 17-foot diameter and an 18-foot pitch. The propellers were of the typical manganese bronze design and construction. At the end of the day, the ship was capable of 18.54 knots, with 16,432 indicated horsepower, which meant the ship not only met, but surpassed its contract speed and power requirements. The relatively new and advanced armor scheme was quite complex. The main armor belt at the waterline, from the after end of the forward barbette to the forward end of the after barbette, was 9 inches, while the upper belt and casemates were 6 inches. The armor belt just outside of both of the primary barbettes was 7 inches, and the waterline armor belts at the bow and stern were 4 inches. The bow belt ran all the way to the very tip of the ship, while the stern belt ended just before reaching the stern post. The barbettes themselves were 14 inches thick, while the turret faces were 10 inches thick, and the turret sides were 8 inches thick. The forward conning tower was 14 inches thick, while the after conning tower was 4 inches thick. The ship's armored deck used the turtleback design, so the sloping edges of the deck around the barbettes was 4 inches thick, 3 inches thick amidships, and the entire flat part of the armored deck was 2.5 inches. As was typical for your pre-dreadnought, there was no underwater defense system. All in all, for its day, Mikasa was very well protected. The ship was also very well armed. It had 4 Armstrong-Whitworth Type 41 12-inch 40 caliber rapid-loading guns, 14 Armstrong-Whitworth Type 41 6-inch 40 caliber quick-firing guns, 20 Armstrong-Whitworth 3-inch quick-firing 12-pounders, 8 Hotchkiss 3-pounders, 4 Hotchkiss 2.5-pounders of Japanese design, and 4 18-inch submerged torpedo tubes. While this armament was ideal and very acceptable to the Japanese, the development of the casemates to house the secondary guns ended up delaying the ship's construction by several months due to their complexity. The design was overall satisfactory, and the Japanese would officially accept it for construction, and the keel was laid down in January 1899, the hull was launched on the 8th of November 1900, and the ship was completed in March 1902, being commissioned IJN Mikasa. Due to his extreme role in developing the modern Japanese Navy, Rear Admiral Yamamoto was promoted to Vice Admiral in 1898, and he was also made Minister of the Navy that same year, and in 1904 he would be promoted to Admiral. He would remain Minister of the Navy until after the Russo-Japanese War in 1906. A vessel like Mikasa could have never been purchased or successfully operated by Japan if it wasn't for Yamamoto's studies and plans culminating in a strong centralized navy. Within the course of half a decade, Yamamoto's plan made Japan the 4th strongest navy in the world, and it boasted what was dubbed the strongest battleship. With that having been said, there's nothing more to add on to this topic for today. So, if you have learned something new in this video, why not leave a like and a comment down below, and have a wonderful day.